Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. We begin in God's name. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome back to the Thriving Muslim Woman. If you listened to last week's season intro, you'll know that we are embarking on a journey through the 10 pillars of what we are calling the Aligned Vitality Method. So 9 of these pillars are based on the factors that survivors of incurable illness have in common, and they are infused with our ultimate pillar, the 10th one, Tawakkul, trust, reliance, and submission to God, complete trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But today I have to start with a confession, and it's the title of an article I wrote years ago, and it still makes people stop in their tracks. I was forced to accept Islam. So before you jump off, wait, I wasn't forced by a person. I wasn't forced by a law. I was forced by the sheer undeniable weight of the truth. I was a woman who was not looking for religion. But when the truth stares you in the face, you have two choices. You can lie to yourself, or you can submit and accept. So today we're going to talk about why that submission, that deep spiritual connection, isn't just a religious requirement. It is literally biological medicine. So we're going to start with what I think is the most important pillar of all of these 10 pillars, okay? And that is deepening your spiritual connection, okay? So we're going to talk about that spiritual connection, why it matters, how it makes a difference in our lives, not just in a spiritual way, but on a physical level as well. And I want to hear from you. So I'm going to share my story. I want you to understand sort of how I arrived at my personal faith and the journey that I've been on, because as we know, Iman, faith, has its ups and downs, right? And so I'm going to bring this around as well to how this whole cancer journey has impacted my faith as well. And I want to hear from you. I want to know what your story is. I'd love for you guys to share in the comments, you know, where are you at right now? And how did you arrive at that place? And also on the subject of I was forced to accept Islam and what happens when, you know, truth stares you in the face. What kind of truth are you embracing today? And are there any truths in your life, something that you're aware of, something that you know to be truth, and yet maybe you're turning away from it, maybe you're ignoring it? So these are some questions I'm gonna propose, and I want you to kind of think about, let them simmer in your mind as we talk, inshallah. So we're gonna start with deepening your spiritual connection. Okay, so this is one of the 10 pillars, and I plan on having this pillar span over 2 to 3 episodes, inshallah. So we're going to really go into depth on this, okay, from different angles. So Dr. Kelly Turner, her research on radical remission, she studied over 1,500 cases of people who saw their terminal illnesses vanish miraculously. And interestingly, I found this really amazing, and it's kind of confirmation, like, of course, right? Of course, this is important. But deepening spiritual connection, it wasn't just a nice to have. It was a statistical, requirement for survival. A statistical requirement for survival. So of all of those people, the over 1,500 people that she interviewed who had this radical remission, right? People with stage 4 cancer who were sent home to die because the doctor said there's absolutely nothing else we can do. You have weeks to live, maybe months. They were sent home, and they made complete, full recoveries with no trace of disease left, right? She wanted to know, what did you do? What were the things that you did, right? Did you change your diet? Did you take certain medicines, right? So she asked these 1,500 people. She found that they all did many things, some of them more than 70 different things, changes that they made in their lives. But there were 9 things that all of them had in common. And one of those 9 was deepening their spiritual connection. So why is that? There's a field called psychoneuroimmunology. When we are in a state of spiritual disconnect, when we're anxious, ungrounded, living a life that contradicts our values, right? And that's one I want you guys to really ponder over. Our body stays in sympathetic mode, right? Fight or flight mode. Your cortisol is high. Your immune system, the very soldiers that are meant to kill cancer cells, that are literally killing cancer cells on a daily basis, it goes on strike. It can't function. And the moment that you connect, that you reconnect with your maker, the moment you pray with true khushu', presence, awareness, focus, your body actually shifts into the parasympathetic state, the rest and repair state. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, surely in the remembrance of Allah, in the remembrance of God, do hearts find rest. Science is finally proving that rest isn't just a feeling. So it's not just that peace, that tranquility that you feel when you remember God. It's more than that. It's a biological shift. And this biological shift allows your natural killer cells, the NK cells, to wake up and start fighting for you. Spirituality isn't an escape like what I used to think it was. I used to think people who were religious, I used to literally laugh at people who were believers and think they were just relying on some crutch, right? Because they couldn't think for themselves. But it's not just an escape from reality, spirituality. It is the ultimate alignment with it. And so that's what these next episodes today and moving forward, inshallah, for the next couple episodes is going to be about. So if you're interested in more detail in my particular story, I used to write a blog. It's called Your American Muslim Neighbor. So on youramericanmuslimneighbor.com, on the menu under Turning Muslim, you can read my entire story in a nutshell. And I also wrote an article that, like I mentioned before, that really went viral. So it's on many websites now, and it's called I Was Forced to Accept Islam. So I was a happy person. I considered myself to be an intellectual. I loved reading books. I loved exploring. I enjoyed philosophy. And if you had told me then when I was in college that I would be wearing hijab and talking to you today about Allah, I would have laughed in your face. And so what happened? I'm going to go back to my story a little bit, and I'm going to kind of take you through it. And basically, like I said, I used to read books like Hey, Is That You, God? by Pasquale Chavella. So these thinkers, these critical thinkers. And I used to literally laugh out loud thinking of people, believing in these ancient books and this unseen, all-powerful creator. And I did so in a very sort of arrogant way, right? And I never would have expected to be an adherent to any religion. And the reason I ended up accepting and embracing Islam is not because I wanted to. It was because I felt I had no choice at all. And I felt like I was compelled, forced to accept Islam. So in my case, I never considered myself actually to be seeking God. So what happened was I was in college. I went to school for art. And so in art school, it was kind of the opposite. If you guys know how it is to be in like a normal academic school where, your focus is on math and history and science, and then art is kind of like a treat, right? So if you get to take an art class, it's a treat, something on the side, something that you get to enjoy. For me, it was the opposite. So my 100% focus was on art. I had classes that were 6 hours long, 5 days a week. And then I also got to take history, and I got to take philosophy and psychology and things like that. And those were my treats. So it gave me the chance to really actually enjoy learning about those subjects. And so one of the subjects I took was called political philosophy. And I was already somebody who questioned religion, who disdained religion, really. I had come to that point where, I really looked down on people who were religious in any sense, in any religion. So people handing out Bibles on the corner, I would think they were, laughable. And if I saw a Muslim in the subway or something, I wouldn't even look. I wouldn't even ask them what time it was if I needed to know the time. And so in political philosophy class, I started to notice something, that these political philosophies were really just like religions. They were trying to create a way of life. And in political philosophy, you're comparing different philosophies to one another, and you can see the different flaws. You can see how one of them is really strong on the social aspect and one is really strong on the law aspect, and how all of them kind of fall short. And I was like, you know what? This is basically just like religion. The only difference is that political philosophies aren't claiming to be from some unseen, all-powerful being, a creator. They're, we all know that humans created them. So what if I could examine religions under the microscope of political philosophy and show how essentially religions are no different than political philosophies, and I can be able to point out their flaws and how essentially they are man-made. And I thought I would just save the whole world by letting all these poor religious people know that, guys, you're just following this nonsense, right? You're just using this crutch where you could just use your intellect, use your brain, and think for yourself. Stop relying on a book. Stop relying on some ancient, political philosophy. That is just a hoax. And so as I did that, right, I started to read religious books. So I got myself a Bible. I got the Bhagavad Gita. Someone handed it to me on the streets of New York City. I read about Buddhism. And the way I got the Quran was very interesting because it wasn't actually on my radar until 9/11 happened. And so 9/11, I was in Brooklyn. I heard the first plane crash into the first building as I was entering my classroom building. And by the time I got up to my classroom, my window was actually facing the Twin Towers, and I saw the second plane hit the second building. And that moment was absolutely devastating. It was absolutely terrifying. I wanted to flee. I wanted to get out of New York. I wanted to get out of the country. And what was being blamed was not just Muslims at the time, right? It was actually Islam. And so for me, I had to include Islam into my project. I had to prove that it was false, that it was man-made. And I thought in doing so, I'd be doing a great service to humanity. And so how I ended up with the Quran was also amazing. I went on a trip with my class to visit MIT, and I was late for a workshop that was all the way on the other side of campus. So as I started, running or walking really fast to try to get to the other side of campus, I decided to cut through a building, which would not have been my norm. I would normally have walked around this building because the class was not inside the building. So I'm like, let me cut through this class and maybe I'll make it on time or I won't be as late. So as I'm walking through that building, there's a Muslim Student Association. And this is related to 9/11 because of the fact that Islam was being blamed. Here was this Muslim Student Association standing there with copies of the Quran translation and pamphlets explaining different aspects of Islam. And so I walked up to them. I asked them, is this free? They said yes. I grabbed the book and I went on my way to the workshop. So it was that Quran that I began reading to attempt to prove that it was man-made and false. But as I began reading it, its cover became worn, its pages became tattered, and I became more and more subdued. So that arrogance and that kind of fiery attitude I had about religion and about these old ancient books started to calm down, and like you're putting water, putting the fire out. And I noticed that this book was very distinct from the other religious books that I had also collected. I was understanding it easily. It wasn't complicated to read. It was very clear. Of course, there were parts I didn't fully understand at the time. And then I started to notice things like one of my friends started ranting about how God in Islam is angry and vengeful. And I immediately came to its defense, to Allah's defense, to Islam's defense, without even realizing it, opening up the Quran and easily flipping to one of the many pages that said, surely Allah is the forgiving, the merciful. So I was like, angry, vengeful, violent? What are you talking about? And it was as if the Quran was actually speaking to me directly. And that was one of the main things that really stopped me in my tracks. The Quran was answering my questions. It was helping me in my own life. And that really threw me off. That really threw me for a loop. And then I saw things that I couldn't explain away, like the Big Bang is mentioned in the Quran. So it's described as the heavens and the earth having been joined as one entity. This is 1400 years ago, right? So the fact that every living thing is made from water was also in the Quran. And then I began to learn, I began to read books about Islam, and I started to learn about the impeccable character of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. A man who even his enemies called Al-Amin, the trustworthy. So what really forced my hand, though, wasn't even these things, right? These things blew my mind. But it was those small, intimate miracles where I'm struggling with a specific problem in my modern 21st century life, and I'm hopping on the train, pulling this Quran out of my bag, and I open it, right? And I just happen to open it to a page that speaks exactly directly to my soul and is exactly what I needed in that moment. So it was providing me with a personal GPS for a world it shouldn't have known about, right? My whole argument was these old ancient books. What relevance do they have today, right? But my intellect was actually being backed into a corner. It was like a mathematical equation that kept coming up with the same answer. Islam is the truth. So I felt forced, not by a person. I didn't even know any Muslims then. But I was forced by my own integrity, because I realized that if I walked away at this point, right, after all of my studies, because I would sit in the library until it closed with books piled on my table about Islam, and I would devour them. And I described it like a person who was in the desert thirsty. I felt like a thirsty, person stranded in the desert seeking water, and it was as if these books about Islam were water to me. It's like I was devouring them. And I knew that if I walked away, that I would be a liar. And I would be choosing to live in a fantasy. So that surrender, that, okay, I give up. God, you exist. And I am just a tiny little human being. I don't know anything. And so this was the first time in my life that I felt my nervous system actually relax. And it was really exhilarating. It wasn't like, I didn't experience tranquility. I felt exhilaration. For the first time in my life, my mind and my soul were no longer fighting, right? The world was no longer a mystery to me. So they were finally on the same team. So again, I'd love for you guys to share with me your stories. Like, how did you, what is your spirituality right now? What is your religious beliefs, and how did you arrive at them? When I hear the other stories, like there's so many stories out there. Mine is just one of millions and millions of beautiful stories of how people come to understand and know and accept Islam. And they are some of the most profound, deep, beautiful stories. And I love listening to them. So whenever I have moments of, weaker faith, it's one of my go-to things, because it kind of talks about the basics, right? And Islam being the truth, I'm going to actually go into that in 2 episodes from today, inshallah. Like, why is it actually the truth, right? So when we talk about Islam, it's more than just having a spiritual practice, right? And that's where the book Radical Remission sort of falls short, right? It talks about deepening your spiritual connection. What does that even mean, right? People do that in all sorts of ways. You can feel spiritual by just meditating. People have all sorts of different spiritual practices. But what I propose is that our spiritual practice has to be based on evidence and proof. So inshallah, we are going to go into that next time. So freedom, right? We're raised on this idea of freedom, and we think that it means having a million choices. But the greatest day of my life was the day that I lost my choice and I accepted the gravity of truth. Once you accept truth, you stop falling. You stop being someone wandering in darkness, and you can start finally building. So I want you to look at your life right now. Is there a truth that you are running from because you're afraid of losing your choice or afraid of something else, right? And if I say that to you, and you something might come to your mind right away. So is there a truth in your life that you're running from or you're turning away from because you're afraid of something? What is that? Be honest with yourself. And is there a part of your practice that you're neglecting because you want to keep one foot in the world and one foot in the religion? So where are you compromising? Where are you not fully stepping 2 feet into your true purpose? And maybe you've had a moment where the truth finally did catch up to you. I'd love to hear that moment as well. What's your moment where you were forced to accept the truth? And you can type truth in the comments if you're ready to move from the routine relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from this like kind of mundane, rote relationship with God, to something much more intentional and powerful. And I'm going to read your comments, inshallah. So are you ready to stop the friction and start the healing, inshallah? I want to know. So what is that one truth about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you can no longer deny? Because here is the thing, that intellectual surrender that I had now, alhamdulillah, 23 plus years ago. So I've officially, in 2025 was the year why I had officially been Muslim more of my life than I was not. Right? And so that time back then, that was really just the training ground. It was like the theory of faith. It was just, okay, I'm a Muslim and I do these things and you move on, right? But to deepen that practice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that I needed that deepening. I thought I knew what trusting and relying on God was. I thought I knew what it meant to truly surrender to Him. But then so many years later, when I sat and got the results of a test showing that I had cancer, suddenly this intellectual Islam, this kind of, maybe more shallow practice that I had fallen into over the years, I knew it wasn't enough. I needed something deeper, and I needed to go back to the source. So next week, inshallah, I'm going to be taking you with me in my footsteps to the Kaaba on Umrah. And I'm going to tell you what happens when your supposedly perfect life hits a brick wall called a diagnosis. And why the first place that I ran to wasn't the pharmacy or the doctors, but it was actually the haram. And it was to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High, the Flawless. So you don't want to miss episode 3 of season 2, inshallah, the Pilgrimage of Mercy. So before we go, check in with yourself. And again, I'd love to hear from you. And I'm actually traveling this week, guys. I'm out of state. I'm in Texas. I'm in a hotel room right now, and I'm actually lying down because I've been in excruciating pain for the last couple days. But this topic, I hope, will be incredibly powerful for all of us. So this isn't only for people who are facing some sort of illness or, terminal diagnosis. The reason we're going into these pillars and this aligned vitality method is so that you can start checking off these boxes and start improving your life so that you can set yourself up for success. And this first pillar, deepening your spirituality, is not only about setting yourself up for success in this life, but it's about setting yourself up for success in this life and the next. And I just love understanding how important it is, like our spiritual connection with God, that impacts your health and vitality in this world, right? And it is literally the only thing that is going to save you in the next world. Right? Because we're all journeying back to our Creator. And the most important question we have to answer for ourselves is, who is that Creator? Why did He create us? What is our purpose in life? Where are we headed? These are the questions that we need to be asking and finding answers to. And alhamdulillah, in Islam, we have all these answers, right? And not only do we have these answers, we have evidence that these answers are, in fact, the truth. So, again, I look forward to reading your comments. I would love for you to share your story I'm sure other sisters would love to read your story here. And I appreciate you. I'm grateful for you being here with me every week. I look forward to seeing you back here, inshallah, next Thursday. And I appreciate your du'as. May Allah accept them. May Allah grant you even more than whatever you ask for me. May He grant you excellent health and a long, tranquil, beautiful life filled with service and submission to Him, filled with good deeds, filled with more successful Ramadans, more accepted prayers, and more goodness, more happiness, more faith and peace. And may Allah grant you all success in this life and the next. Ameen. So, Jazakumullah khairan. I love you all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't forget to check out the link that is on the screen right now, so you can get your anti-spiral plan, because as we know, one of the pillars that we're going to be talking about in the future is about your social connection. So this can help jumpstart that, inshallah. And then we want to hopefully be launching an online version of the Uplift course. So you can also join the waitlist for that. And then remember to like and subscribe to the FCAD Institute YouTube channel so that you can get reminders about all of our new uploads and every time we go live on Thursdays. And we'd love to hear from you. So please comment. It helps our channel grow. And share with someone also who can benefit from this, inshallah. All right. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.